Ladies and gentlemen, here we go.
All right. Howdy, everybody. Welcome to Not Another Magic Podcast, a podcast in which we discuss EDH and, I guess, specific decks that we've built and archetypes we've explored for specific commanders. I am one of your hosts, Aidan,
And I'm Sean.
and we are a couple of relatively new Magic players who just love this format so much that we decided that we would turn our countless hours that we've wasted on this into an actual bit of content or product that people can consume, enjoy, and engage with us on. So I think it's appropriate for us to address what we're going to be doing. We are going to be picking each week a commander and looking at basically building a deck each. We're going to include deck lists in the description of the video, or I don't know, wherever you get your podcast, if we can do that. We haven't figured that out yet because we just started. Um, but we are going to be building decks and then discussing what makes our decks tick. And there's going to be a few caveats there. So we're not CEDH players. So we're not going to be building CEDH decks, although every once in a while one of us might try to do a mean combo deck or something like that. We're also not going to be doing precon upgrades, even though this week our commander is Wilhelt the Rotcleaver, who does have a precon that we'll talk about in a little bit. We are not just going to be upgrading those precons, and in fact, we're mostly starting from scratch and just ignoring it completely. So for Wilhelm, there are going to be a lot of common threads because there's only so much you can do within the Dimir zombies. But for the most part, we are not really building off the precon at all. And we're also going to be trying to avoid common strategies as much as we can. Not like there are optimal ways to play each of these cards, but we're going to be trying to stick to more niche strategies. Maybe we'll go for a flavor deck one week, or a this isn't quite like a I don't know. We'll sort of explore it as it goes along. But essentially, the point is we want to try to shine some light on some of the lesser played cards and strategies for each of these commanders. Is there anything you want to add to that, Sean?
Yeah, I would love to. I think one of the biggest attractors of Magic the Gathering is how much flavor there is. The card art, the lore, even just the little blurbs of text on the bottom. Um,
Yeah.
it adds a lot of depth to the game, and I think that's something that really needs to get tapped into. So that's what I did for my deck. I made a very fun, flavorful deck to start us off this week. I'm very excited to talk about it.
Cool. So before we get into our deck lists, let's touch briefly on Wilhelt the Rotcleaver. Um, if you could pull him up,
I would love to.
put him on the screen. So Wilhelt is three, or no, is he two? I don't actually have him up on my screen. Yeah, he's two and one blue, one black, so two in Dimir colors. Whenever another zombie you control dies, if it didn't have Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Decayed is a new uh, mechanic introduced in Shadows, or no, it's not Shadows of Innistrad. It's Midnight Hunt, where once the creature attacks, it's sacrificed at the end of combat if it hasn't already been destroyed. And then at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a zombie, and if you do, draw a card. So as far as like what this commander does, it seems to be pretty straightforward. Wilhelt wants to create a lot of zombies. He wants to sacrifice his zombies. He wants to make more zombies. And so that sort of leads you down into two main strategies that I found, which are zombies and aristocrats. And there doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot else you can do with this commander. Do you agree, disagree, Sean?
I agree 100%. The aristocrat strategy was something that immediately stuck out to me as a potential path. Not one that I went down, but I definitely see the appeal.
Yeah, I think I've got like two or three aristocrats pieces in my deck. I really tried to avoid it, but when you're gonna have so many zombies dying and so many cards that kill zombies, it's hard not to want to have a payoff for them dying.
Yep.
So a little bit about the precon, I guess. It looks like Wizards tried to go for a generic big zombie horde, bash you in the face, zombie tribal with a lot of generals and or I guess lords is the right word for it, to give buffs to all of your zombies and a lot of payoffs for having zombies, creating zombies. One thing that I wanted to mention here was that the precon we noticed has no one drops, which was just hilarious. And I don't think that's, especially with how fast the format seems to be getting these days. That seemed like a bit of an oversight. So another thing that I noticed that stood out to me is this deck is running blue and it doesn't have any counter spells. What are your thoughts on that, John?
It's very strange. It's something that caught me off guard when you brought it up to me. And it's actually something that I realized about halfway through the process of my own deck building is, hey, I'm running blue and I don't have any counter spells. Like surely I'm missing out on something here. So I've got a couple in my deck now, but it does seem like a vast untapped wealth of interaction that's not being used here. And I'm a little interested as to why that is.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I sort of focused in on when I was building it, because I think I actually don't have any counter spells in my deck as well, sort of taking a page out of Wizard's book here, I guess, um, is that the strategy doesn't really seem to want counter spells, I don't think. So one of the things that I think is emblematic or iconic about the zombie tribal is that they're not terribly attached to most of their creatures, and in fact they're going to be wanting to sacrifice them and shuffle them a lot. So I think they're not terribly concerned about even getting their board wiped, having a single piece of spot removal shot in. So I think it actually makes sense from that perspective. Another thing is that you could sort of view counter spells as spot removal, so to speak. It's just you're removing it while it's on the stack rather than while it's on the battlefield. And at least the precon and the deck that I've created have a decent amount of spot removal. And I think because this deck is going to be more skewed towards black, because that's where the majority of the zombies are, you're going to be guided towards spot removal. Things like Infernal Grasp, things like Eaten Alive, Spark Harvest, Bone Shards, Bone Splinters, that kind of stuff, rather than wanting to run counter spells. But I mean, I think that's a bit of a personal choice. If you're building the deck, you like counter spells, run counter spells. I don't think it's make or break at all.
Yeah. Also, it definitely depends on the strategy that you're taking with Wilhelt himself. If you want to keep him on the board to always be making full advantage of the first part of his ability where he's creating decayed zombies, or if you're fine with letting him ebb and flow and come back as you need him.
Yeah,
So I need him on the board for basically the whole time. So I've got a few counter spells in here, other ways to give him hexproof and keep him protected, but this deck definitely could go without it if you wanted to take it in a different path.
definitely. Okay, so now one more thing, I guess. I just wanted to shine some light on cards that I think are kind of all-stars for Wilhelt, and most decks would be, I guess, remiss not to include them. And I think the first one that I would put in this category is Gravecrawler, if you could pull that one up. It's just absolutely the best card in this deck, I think. And I think part of the reason they didn't include it in the precon is just because it's kind of an expensive card already, and
Yeah.
Wizards is kind of aware of the economy of the game, and yeah, I don't know. It's I especially given the lack of one drops in the precon, I find it a little bit funny that they chose not to include it. Especially because I think it was Army of the Damned was a $20 card before. No, not Army of the Damned. One of the big sorceries in this deck, we'll probably talk about it later in the precon, was also a $20 card before this, before the precon dropped, and it's dropped now significantly in price because it was included. So I don't know. Basically, every Wilhelt deck wants Gravecrawler. You're always going to be able to cast it. Your commander's a zombie. Your commander's going to make zombies when Gravecrawler dies. It just seems like a must include, you know?
Yep.
Yeah, do you want to mention any all-stars you think you have?
Um, no, I think I've got a little bit too much of a budget deck to really include some all stars. One that I'd definitely like to talk about, though, which is a recent addition, is going to be Tainted Adversary.
Mm-hmm.
This card is one of the new ones from Midnight Hunt, and you can pay 2 and a black any number of times as it enters the battlefield to create double that amount of 2/2 black zombie tokens. They come in with Decayed, unfortunately, so it's not the real value that you could possibly get with Wilhelt, but, never going to say no to a bunch more tokens.
Yeah, I think this one's interesting, and I'm not sure I would put it in the all-stars category, but I could understand how a deck that was built differently from mine would. The thing that kind of holds me back a little bit is that they come in with Decayed, and the fact that Wilhelt wants to create Decayed zombies off of non-Decayed zombies is sort of what gives me pause here, right?
Yep.
Because those zombies, like, I kind of view all of the zombies as having an extra line of text in this deck, which is when this dies, create a Decayed zombie. So having those come in without the extra line of text is a little bit iffy. And another thing that sort of holds me back on Tainted Adversary a little bit is the fact that you're essentially you're paying, okay, so you got 2 for 1 and a black for a 2/3 with Death Touch. That's not a terrible rate, especially because it's got the zombie tribe. Then you're paying, what is it, 3 and 2 black for that plus a decayed zombie. You're paying 5 and 3 black for 2 decayed zombies. The cost of casting this, I think, is a little bit high, but if you are just looking to go wide and create a huge swarm of zombies, and if you're running low on cards, because yes, blue is very good at drawing cards. Black is okay at drawing cards, I suppose. But oftentimes, if you're playing a tribal deck, you're going to be playing creatures more so than you're going to be playing your card draw spells, because that's going to be less creatures you can run in your deck. So I do like it as okay, my board is empty. Let me just dump all my mana. I've got one card in my hand. It's Tainted Adversary, but now I've got a board.
Yep.
Another card I wanted to call attention to that I've pulled up here is, if you want to take a look at it, is Carrion Feeder, which I think is probably another. This one's cheap. There's no excuse here, Wizards. What's going on, man? This card I think is just absolutely incredible and will help. It's a free sacrifice outlet, which is incredible to begin with. It can't block. That's sad, I guess, but I don't think you're really going to be needing to block with it that much. Because you will probably be creating a lot of 2/2 zombie tokens to begin with. The decayed ones obviously can't block, neither can Carrion Feeder, but the other zombies can deal with that. Or you can take a little bit of damage because you'll be getting damage back, or you'll be getting life back, as some decks will. The real thing is that Carrion Feeder gets huge as you sacrifice. It's a free sacrifice outlet. It's a zombie, so it's got the tribe going for it, and it's a 1-drop. I think this card is awesome. What do you think?
I agree. It fits perfectly into the style of my deck, which I'll get into a little bit later. It is S plus rating for me. This is a great card.
Yeah, Carrion Feeder. And I think also, if your Viscera Seer almost deserves an honorable mention. It doesn't get big. It's not a zombie, but it is a free sacrifice outlet for only 1 black mana. So because Wilhelt wants to have so many payoffs for sacrificing, I think Viscera Seer is also another card that could fill this role if you want another duplicate of Carrion Feeder, or you just don't have Carrion Feeder and you don't want to go out and buy cards. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and move on to Sean? Tell us about your deck and what you're trying to do, what you think the cards are that really make it go.
Well, I had a lot of fun with this deck. The first thing I did after we decided which commander we were going to be building for it is I went on the Magic Wiki and I looked up to see if there was any lore around Wilhelt. And there's one beautiful short story. I'm going to have to look up who it was written by. But it was well done. It details Wilhelt's history and his relationship with Gisa Chikani. Not sure how to pronounce her name.
Nor am I.
Shannon McGuire is the author. It's very well done, well written, very short, but it poignant in its own way. It details how basically Wilhelt just fell head over heels for Gisa, even in death, and was reanimated purely so he could continue lusting after her. And I took that theory and I ran with it. In the story, he shows up at Gisa's stronghold with a massive army of zombies in order to prove his worth to her. So I tried to capture that in my deck. I like to go wide. I've got a lot of cards. Army of the Damned as one. 5 and 3 black for 13 tapped 2/2 zombie creature tokens. And if that wasn't enough, it's got flashback for 7 and 3 black. So if you're going deep in the game and you've got the mana to spare, That's a hell of a board state. So I've got that idea, and then smattered in there, I've got some amass cards. I know this is not necessarily Wilhelt's neck of the woods, but I can't really say no to a bunch of big zombies smattered in there with the little ones, and those are ultimately what I would say consist of a win condition for me.
Mm-hmm.
Some real, let's see, let me pull this one up. My favorite by far is going to be Dreadhorn Invasion. It's 1 for a black, which gives me at the beginning of my upkeep, I lose 1 life and amass 1, and I get lifelink on any zombies with 6 or more power when they attack.
This one is interesting to me, and I sort of wanted to ask this question to you. Do you think this card is better utilized if you're constantly amassing and creating a new zombie army and then sacrificing it before it comes around again? Or do you think this is one of your avenues to getting one of the larger zombies?
It's definitely one of my avenues to getting a larger zombie. In the few games that I've played with it, I've had the opportunity to play it at the start of the game on an empty board, and I've also had the opportunity to play it later in the game to continue beefing up an army that I already have going. I think both work very well. I think it's just a powerful card all around, but it's definitely good to get the ball rolling. If you can get it going before anyone has a real reason to deal with an enchantment, it can kind of snowball and you can get it going. But the one thing that I do like about all of the amass cards is that aside from giving you a bigger creature to deal with every time you amass, they all have, or not all, but a great many of them give your zombie tokens some kind of buff. You know, it'll give them hexproof and menace. It'll give them death touch. It'll give them flying, one or the other. It just makes them a lot more hard to deal with. And even a little horde of like a couple 2/2 tokens and a 4/4 army is suddenly really hard to deal with when they all have hexproof, menace, and flying.
Yeah, definitely.
So it can get out
and
of
if
control
you,
pretty quickly.
I think that's one thing that the zombies want more than anything is keywords, because for the most part, it seems like the keyword they have access to is Decayed, which is just the downside.
Yeah.
So I think Lords are pretty effective here. And while we're on the topic of amass, there was one card I wanted to point out. This one, I totally just stole this from the command zone. But I think it's an awesome card, and it certainly, I think, is underplayed. I'm going to check. It doesn't even show up on Wilhelt's page, I don't think, on EDH Rec. But it's Lazotep Plating, one that I've pulled up on my side here. 1 and a blue to amass 1, and you and permanents you control gain hexproof until the end of the turn. So this card I think is awesome, especially like you mentioned before, to keep Wilhelt on the board, because it's true. Most of these decks are going to want Wilhelt on the board. So this is like half a heroic intervention, and you also get a zombie. And honestly, I think this card is even better when you're not amassing, because it's just, you can sort of ignore the amass and just say you get a zombie token, Wilhelt sacks it immediately. But even if you are just adding a 1/1 counter to one of your creatures, I still think this is a really awesome card that it fits in blue decks outside of the zombie decks. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to take a pause for that one.
Powerful card for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorites of the amass cards that I've gotten in my deck.
It does actually show up on ADH Rec. I was lying. Forget that.
Another one I want to touch on. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. This isn't an amass card, but this does give me another big zombie that I like to throw around, and that is Grin, Corpseborn. He enters the battlefield untapped and doesn't untap during my untap step, but you can, at any point, sacrifice another creature to untap him and put a +1/+1 on it. And when he attacks, you get a little destroy target creature that defending player controls and put another counter on it. So he grows pretty quickly if you can get him rolling, if you've got the board state to support it. If not, boy, he just sits there. So it's really hit or miss, but when it hits, it's a real power. It starts off as a 5/5, and you can get that up very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not. This is one I completely missed when I was building my deck, and I think it's honestly a bit of an oversight. 5 is a bit of a hefty cost, but just every line of text, like you could cut off at just sacrifice another creature, untap Grim and put a 1/1 counter on it, and that's still a pretty good card for this deck. But the fact that he also, you get to destroy target creature that the defending player controls, you can just reach past whatever they're doing, grab their commander, and they can't do anything about that. I think this is an awesome card.
Yep, it's a true Commander All-Star. It does everything you need to, and then some. I'm really happy to find this. It's easily the most expensive card in my deck at $17 according to Architect, but I think it's well worth the money. And I cut costs everywhere else to keep this deck at a reasonable spot, just so I could afford
Grim
this.
is a Seeker commander.
Yeah, he could be a commander. That's not something that I even considered, but he is a legendary creature.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be the win condition part of my deck, but I do have a little more fun that I had with this deck. Wilhelt is obsessed with Gisa, so I threw in a bunch of cards that are related to Gisa in this deck for no reason other than it's Gisa. So the only 2 cards in here that aren't zombie tribals are Ghoul-Collar Gisa, it's a human wizard, and Gisa Glorious Resurrector, also a human wizard. And then I've got a couple other cards that she's depicted in the artwork or in the flavor text. And so I consider these my flavor wins. If I can get these cards to resolve, I consider that a flavor win, even if I lose the game. Just a little bit of a more fun that I can have playing this game, even if I can't get my zombie horde rolling the way I want it to. I can imagine Wilhelt finally getting with his long forgotten love.
Yeah, I mean, as much as she may not like it, she's in the deck, so she's got to play along.
Yep.
I do really like Ghoul-Collar Gisa here, because it basically, you start with 1 zombie and then you sack it next turn and you get 2 zombies. So even the baseline of it, I think, is not terrible. 2 zombies a turn isn't the greatest, but that's kind of, I think, what most people would say you're planning for from Endless Ranks of the Dead. So if you can manage to sacrifice something bigger than that, like let's say you amass a 5 and then somebody goes to destroy it or something like that, you can sacrifice it at instant speed, and all of a sudden you have a bunch of little zombies instead of your big beater zombie. So I really like Ghoul-Collar Gisa in this deck.
Yep. And another one of the cards, actually, that I've got 2 of them, of these flavor cards. One is the Maulfeld Twins, 5 and a black for a 4/4 zombie, and when it dies, you get 2/2/2 tokens. So even more tokens there. And then also the Morkrud Behemoth, which is a 7/6 for 4 and a black, but with the additional cost of paying 1 and a black or sacrificing a creature. And also has Menace, if a 7/6 wasn't scary enough. So these type of creatures, they fit well with the theme of having a bunch of tiny zombies and then a couple big ones that can swing away. And then, flavor wins, because everyone loves flavor wins. If I can play more Gisa cards, then Wilhelt's happy and I'm happy.
So you zeroed in on the fact that the flavor text here is from Ghoul-Collar Gisa, from Morkrud Behemoth, and then on top of that, it's a decent card to run in the deck anyway.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah, the Behemoth is an interesting one to me, and I think it's an awesome budget card for this deck. But I do kind of think about, like, you just got board wiped, and then all of a sudden you have to pay 5 2 black, 7 mana total for 7/6. That one does make me a little bit sad.
Yeah.
But as a flavor card, it is pretty solid.
The board wipe is something that I, through a lot of pain, realized that this deck is pretty susceptible to board wipes. I mean, any deck that goes wide is susceptible to board wipes. So, in an effort to counteract that, threw in some counter spells here. Got a lot of token generation that just, I've got Army of the Damned, like I touched on before. Also, from Under the Floorboards is another example of just a card, a sorcery that just creates a bunch of zombie tokens. I want to get my board back up and going as quickly as possible after a board wipe, and these cards are the best way to do it. But yeah, board wipes are real killer. If I get set back to ground zero, to square one, then I'm in trouble. Same as Wilhelt did when he got squashed by a tree, but he managed to come back. So we'll see if I can do the same.
So one thing I wanted to focus in on, you mentioned from under the floorboards, is that it has a madness cost. So it's normally 3 and 2 black to create 3 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and you gain 3 life, but that's kind of secondary. But if you pay the madness cost, which is X and 2 black, you can create as many zombie tokens as you have mana for, I guess -2. This Wilhelt does seem to. There's a lot of ways you could build this deck in which you have a graveyard theme. There's a lot of zombie cards where it's create a zombie for each zombie in your graveyard. Create a zombie equal to the number of with power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. So there is a viable discard graveyard theme, and I was curious if you went that route or if this is just sort of an incidental piece of text that might be used in some other deck.
It leans toward the latter. As much as I would love to create a veritable army of tokens, I think I'm just going to have to be satisfied with 3. I don't have any ways to discard consistently. So I've gone away from the traditional zombie mechanic of, sending people to the graveyard, bringing them back, just constant recursion. I felt like Wilhelt, he's new to the game. He's recently resurrected, and he's controlling this horde of zombies by pure will and just being really horny. That's all he's got going for him. He doesn't have any skill. He's just kind of dragging himself along, trying to hang out with Gisa. And these zombies are following him just out of... They don't really have a choice. And we see that when he first meets Gisa, she does her little whistle magic and takes control of most of the zombies in his horde, and damn near takes control of Wilhelt himself, and it takes a massive effort and pure willpower to prevent that from happening. So I've got that type of flavor in this deck. There's no recursion mechanics.
Really?
Yeah. I think there might be a couple cards in here that just have it incidentally. So, sorry, Gravecrawler. You don't belong in this deck.
Wow. Okay, I guess Gravecrawler does not belong in every deck. He belongs in most decks. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about with regard to your deck?
Yeah, I mean, we could touch on how to make this deck better. I've got...
Sure, yeah.
10 flavor cards that I have here that are... I don't want to say dead weight, but they could be definitely better spent. Including some targeted removal. I don't have a whole lot of targeted removal in this deck. A little short on draw as well, but I don't think that's an issue. Wilhelt's got built-in draw, and I usually have a plethora of creatures to sacrifice to get that going. So I haven't ever struggled to fill my hand. But yeah, targeted removal would be a big thing to add to this deck, as would recursion mechanics. It's a zombie deck at the end of the day, and you're remiss for not including that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. That's my deck.
Cool. And so just once again, I presume we're going to upload this on YouTube and hopefully on other podcast sources. In YouTube, we're definitely going to put the decks in the video description, but if not, we will find some other workaround that you'll hear about on a future podcast. Okay, so I guess I will take it away towards my deck. I think my deck could be considered a lot more of a traditional Wilhelt deck with some interesting, probably skewing towards janky ways to take advantage of the decayed zombies that I think most people aren't paying attention to. So I'm going to be more highlighting a lot of cards that I think could go in a Wilhelt deck, and you probably don't want to put every single card I mentioned in there. I tried that, and I ended up with like 250 cards and no purpose. But if you can sort of hone it down a little bit and use some of these tools, I think that would make for a much more interesting Wilhelt deck than the generic make a bunch of zombies, sack them, aristocrat somebody out, and win. So one of the cards, and I just pulled this up on my side. One of the cards that I really want to talk about here, and probably the main win condition of this deck, is the Grey Merchant of Asphadel. This guy is, I probably should have mentioned him in the Wilhelt All-Stars, but I think he just falls short of that mark when compared to something like Gravecrawler. But the Grey Merchant of Asphadel, or Gary, is 3 and 2 black for a zombie creature, so that's good already. When Great Merchant of Asphadel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. You gain life equal to the loss this way, to the life lost this way. So it's not you gain life equal to X, it's you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So in Commander, even if you've only got, 4 devotion to black, let's say you got Wilhelt, you got 2 other zombies, Gary comes in with 2 pips right there, and he checks his own devotion. So, like, worst case scenario, it's just him and Wilhelt. You've got, you're gaining, 9 life there? And then let's say it's 4 or 5, you're gaining 12, 15, 20 life. That could really offset a lot of what I think Black wants to do with its card draw, which is take damage to draw cards. So I think Grey Merchant of Asphodel is really awesome. And of course, with recursion mechanics, it would really suck if this guy got exiled. I'll say that much. And that's the one thing for my deck. If you wanted to shut it off, just exile Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and then all of a sudden we're basically just a go wide zombie deck with a lot worse of a way to actually win the game. So going from here, let's see, there's a couple of routes we could go, and I think one of the first ones I want to do is talk about, okay, so if you have a card that's not in your command zone that's going to be your win con, you're going to want tutors. But there's, I don't know, how do you feel about tutors, Sean?
I personally don't like them. I see the value in them, but, I'm new to Magic, and the idea of just having 100 cards in your deck is still so much fun to me. You never know what's going to be at the top, and I like to have each card mean something, and the idea of just digging through your deck to find your win condition. Obviously, it's good. You're finding your win condition on command, but I like the variability of having to deal with what you have in hand. I like how it forces you to be flexible. That's a personal opinion. I'm definitely in the minority here, but I'm not a big fan of tutors.
Yeah, and black is the tutor color. That's like one of the things that is most essential to black's color identity, is the fact that they tutor way more effectively than all the other colors. But because of that, those cards are also very highly sought after. And if you want to include vampiric, demonic tutor, even grim tutor, that's like you're pumping up the price of your deck very quickly for a single card. And I do think you have a very, very good point that it makes the deck much more consistent, which some people would view as much less fun. And since we're not designing CEDH decks here, I'm not just going to sit here and throw in all of the great black tutors that we have. Although I think Profane Tutor deserves a mention here. It's not in my deck, but Profane Tutor is a really awesome. It's 2 and a black to suspend it. So you get the tutor after, I think it's 2 upkeeps. On your 3rd upkeep, you get to tutor for a card. That one I think is just really awesome, very cheap, and very close to a staple in budget black decks, in my opinion. But speaking of budget tutors, there are a couple budget tutors that I wanted to actually draw attention to, because they aren't necessarily your traditional tutors. And these are, I'm going to pull them up here in a sec, Dizzy Spell, Perplex, and Long-Term Plans. And so one thing you'll notice in common with these cards is that they all have the keyword transmute. So what transmute does is the card has a color identity, and then you can transmute it for generally it is 3 mana, but it's the colors of the card's color identity. So Dizzy Spell, for example, is a blue card, and it transmutes for 1 gray, 2 blue. Perplex is it actually transmutes for its normal cost, which is 1 gray, 1 blue, 1 black. These allow you to search. It's not a perfect tutor because the card has other functionality. Like Perplex is actually a counterspell that I forgot when we were talking about counterspells earlier, because I would mostly just be using it as a tutor for some of the 3-drop cards that are really going to make this deck hum.
Of which there are many.
Yes, the 3 slot is always so crowded, and this deck is no exception. Yeah. Dizzy Spell, you can tutor for Gravecrawler, obviously. You can tutor for your Soul Ring. You can tutor for your Carrion Feeder. It's a little bit expensive to tutor for 3, and the card isn't great. It's just target creature gets -3/0 until the end of turn for 1 blue. Not a very powerful effect. Combat tricks, especially in EDH, aren't very good. But the fact that you can pay for 3 and tutor for 3 of the cards that I think are probably 3 of the most powerful cards in your deck, Soul Ring, Carrion Feeder, and Gravecrawler, I think really makes it a very effective budget tutor, and just something I wanted to call attention to because it could fit in a lot of decks, and probably more decks than it currently is in. Long-term plans is another one. This one actually doesn't have the transmute keyword. It's 2 and a blue for search your library for a card, shuffle your library, and then put that card third from the top. So in a lot of decks, I think that this wouldn't be that great because you're saying, okay, I'll draw this in 3 turns, whatever. The game state might have changed by then. The board wipe you were tutoring for is no longer there, or this guy's about to kill me with commander damage. I need Swords to Plowshares right now. But one thing I like about long-term plans, and especially if you're going for a combo with Grey Merchant Asphadel, 5 cost to begin with, so it's going to be a very expensive combo to pull off. Definitely takes it out of the CEDH category just on the cost alone. With Wilhelt's ability to sacrifice a zombie and draw a card, usually what that reads is draw it on your next turn, not draw it on your third turn. And then if you have other card draw effects like Grim Reaper, like what's his name, Undead Augur, like oh god, where is this card? I know what the art looks like. I don't know what the card looks like. Dark Prophecy. All of these are going to be payoffs for sacrificing your zombies, which you're going to be doing anyway. You're going to take a little bit of life and then draw another card. So a lot of times with Wilhelt specifically, you can get the long-term plan into your hand during the turn you play it, or at the very least in the next turn that you play it. So I think that this one is a really powerful card in this specific deck, and perhaps one that deserves more consideration. Whenever I hear people talk about it, they always say, oh yeah, it's kind of like the shitty tutor. I just didn't have money. But I myself am very high on it. So let's see. Another one is Brain Spoil, which is just a 5 cost transmuter. The reason it's 5 cost is that you can dig for Gary. That one, I don't know. In a deck that's not trying to recur Gary a bunch, I think it doesn't really need to be here. Yeah, let's see. Hang on. Right. So, and then another budget tutor that I was kind of surprised to find out about while I was doing research for this was Mausoleum Secrets. 1 and a black. When you can search your library for a black card with CMC equal to, or sorry, mana value equal to less than the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and then put it into your hand and shuffle your library. So if you're going to be running a graveyard deck, this one is very close to a must include in my view, because most of the time you're going to be able to tutor for 3, 4, 5 mana, and most of the cards in your deck are going to be that cost. And then especially if you're self-milling too, you could just tutor for basically anything after a couple turns. Not a direction I chose to go with my deck, so I left it out, but I think very important. So that's my little spiel on tutors. So another thing that I thought was kind of interesting, and when you're going for a combo win, especially one with Grey Merchant Asphadel 5 cost that needs a couple other pieces to go around it, because you don't just want to be playing your combo piece and then waiting for a rotation of the board to let it come back, because somebody could, killing it's not the worst thing in this deck because you have reanimation. But if they exile it in the meantime, or if they tuck it into your deck or something like that, or if they steal it, that could be really bad for you. So you want to be able to pop off basically the turn that you play Grey Merchant Asphadel, and at the very least recur it once, if not twice. So I focused in on a couple of, single-use ramp spells that I wanted to call attention to because I thought that they were really neat cards. I'm just going to pull one of them up right here, which is my favorite, and I think probably the best one for this deck, which is Culling the Weak. All of these are 1 black mana to play, and so I'm just going to read out a bunch of them machine gun style. But so everybody knows about Dark Ritual. Dark Rituals, pay 1 black, get 3 black. Whatever. It's a good card. The other ones I think have perhaps a lower floor but a higher ceiling, with the exception of Culling the Weak. Culling the Weak is 1 black and sacrifice a creature to get 4 black mana, which it doesn't seem like an incredible deal in just your generic black deck, but in Wilhelt, who wants to be sacrificing zombies anyway, you could almost see this as a bit of upside, and it's going to give you more ramp. And I do think the difference between 4 mana and 3 mana is significant, especially when you're just adding mana that you don't have access to because of your lands. So I really like Culling the Weak here. And then there's also Bubbling Muck, 1 black until the end of your turn. Yeah, this one's awesome.
That's a big one.
Until the end of your turn, whenever a player taps a swamp for mana, it produces an additional black. So it only hits swamp. You got to have the swamp type. It's not just any land that produces black. And it does help your opponents. But most of the time, they're not going to be holding up mana thinking, ooh, what if this guy plays Bubbling Muck? Then I can blah, 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 blah. So they'll float 1 or 2 black if they've got a kill spell. But, they play their kill spell using 1 land instead of 2. I don't really see that as huge of a downside. But if you're planning for it, and I'm running a majority of swamps in my deck, as well as dual lands that carry the swamp type, so you're going to play this thing, and then all of a sudden you're just going to double your mana. Sure, it's not Cabal Coffers, but it's also a $2 card as opposed to like 20 or 30 or whatever Cabal Coffers is. So that one I thought deserved to mention. Also, Songs of the Damned, which adds 1 black for each creature in your graveyard. Another awesome self-mill graveyard type thing for Wilhelt. You could easily get 12 mana off this thing, and then at this point it's like a better Jessica's Will, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think those guys deserve a look. So you could play out your Grey Merchant of Asphadel, play Cold a Week, play Bubbling Muck, play Song. You probably play Bubbling Muck first, or you play Songs of the Damned, and then all of a sudden you have enough mana to sack it, reanimate it, sack it, reanimate it a couple times. This is where Carrion Feeder becomes awesome because it doesn't even cost you mana to reanimate it or to sack it. So this I think is another point where I'm gonna now pivot a little bit and show off another card that I discovered while I was doing research for this that I've pulled up over here, which is Strands of Night. And this, I think, is probably one of the best ways to get something in and out of your graveyard really fast. It's very risky. 2 and a 2 black to pay 2 black, pay 2 life, not great, sacrifice a creature, and return a creature card from the graveyard to play. So, or sacrifice a swamp, sorry, not sacrifice a creature. So this card is going to deramp you. It's very dangerous. And if somebody has interaction, like, you're going to want to pay attention to what the other side of the board has going on when you do this. But if you can get Strands of Night and Carrion Feeder out, you play Grey Merchant of Asphadel, all of a sudden, so you're cycling through your whole deck, even if you're only pinging it for 4 devotion, which is 2 from Strands of Night and 2 from Grey Merchant of Asphadel, this could very quickly add up to a kill if you've got, like, I don't know, 8 swamps, because you can sacrifice the swamps that you've already tapped as well. So you're tapping 8 swamps, you're getting 4 triggers here. Carrion Feeder sacks it, you tap 2, sacrifice one of the tapped swamps, and then bring Grey Merchant of Asphadel back. You do that 4 times, that's what? 16 damage to everybody, you gain 1 billion life. And I think that's the worst case scenario. You're probably going to have some kind of enchantment or creature out there with multiple pips in it. If you can get up to 10 devotion, this is just ridiculous. And I think Strands of Night deserves consideration in a reanimator deck, especially if you're running Grey Merchant of Asphadel, because it can be a really effective way to very quickly recur and destroy a lot of creatures.
So this does bring up one question I have about your deck.
Yeah.
Are you trying to do 40 damage in 1 turn to everyone on the board?
I don't think so. I mean, that's kind of like the dream scenario, right? But I don't think that's realistic. I am packing a lot of, and I intentionally did this, I'm packing a lot of enchantments and creatures with multiple black pips in their cost so that you can, so that Grey Merchant of Asphadel hits very hard. And I think it is certainly realistic to imagine a scenario where it happens, but it is not that likely. There aren't too many reanimator cards, especially not for relatively cheap. I am running Reanimates, which is just 1 black, bring a creature back from the graveyard. And then lose life equal to its power. Let's see. I've got Haunting Voyage. You could go for something the Grave Horde. I forget what that was card, but it's like 4 and 2 black to bring back any number of cards from any graveyards. I would just choose Grey Merchant of Asphadel in this point. You could run like, I think it's Army of the Damned is the one that, no, Army of the Damned is not the one, but there are a couple ways to bring cards back from the graveyard. And I don't think it's terribly likely that you're going to be doing a bunch of them in the same turn without Strands of Night. So in a way, no. Strands of Night is just, you draw this card and you're like, okay, cool. Tutor for Grey Merchant of Asphadel, get Strands of Night out. People are like, what is he doing here? This is a terrible card. And then the next turn, if you can manage to untap with it, which I don't think is a terribly high ask, because I'm not sure that's going to raise many eyebrows if you haven't really shown your hand yet. Yeah. Although reanimator strategies are known for stuff like this, so maybe it will. Once you get Grey Merchant out, beep, 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 40 damage in 1 turn. That is a win condition, but not the win condition.
Gotcha.
Victimize is another really cool one. You can sack a creature to bring 2 back from your graveyard, which I think has utility outside of Grey Merchant of Asphadel as well. You're always going to have a Decayed Zombie or 2 to sacrifice, and that'll just, if they get rid of your Plague Belcher, they get rid of your Oh god, I forget who that big guy that you mentioned earlier was.
Grin.
Grim. Yeah, they get rid of your Grim, and then all of a sudden you can just sack a decayed zombie and bring it back.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I think that's graveyard stuff is good in zombie decks. Who would have thought?
No.
So, let's see. That actually is a decent point where I wanted to mention a couple cards that probably should have been in the All Stars category as well. Ebon Death, the Draco Lich, a card recently from AFR. 2 and 2 black for a legendary zombie dragon, flash and flying. It enters tapped, which is not great, but whenever a creature under your control dies, you can play Ebon Death from your graveyard. It's kind of like um, Baby's first Carrion Feeder in a lot of ways, because in most scenarios it is just a strictly worse Carrion Feeder. But if you're not running anthems and lords to give your zombies flying, which if I'm going to be honest, there aren't very many good ones. Ebon Death is a really great way to just give you a beater. It's not a 5/2 is a much better beater in a 20 life 2-player format, but it's still a decent enough threat that once you get it out, people are going to be paying attention. Diagraph Colossus,
Oh
also really
yeah,
good.
absolutely.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and read that one out?
Yeah, let me pull it up real quick because I've got that one in my deck as well.
Yeah, this is going to fit into every Wilhelt shell.
Yep. This is a 2/2 for 2 and a black. It enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it for each zombie in your graveyard. And if that wasn't good enough, it's a commander card, so it has to do multiple things. Whenever you cast a zombie spell, you get another token. It comes in tapped, but we're going to be sacking them anyway or doing other things with them. Monster of a card.
Diagraph Colossus absolutely makes this deck sing. Another 3-drop that is going to be in the contested 3-drop spot. Speaking of which, there's also Plague Belcher. 2, 1 black, menace. When it enters the battlefield, you put 2/1/1 counters on a creature you control. Usually that's going to be a decayed zombie, and then it comes in as a 3-mana 5/4, which is incredible. And then it's got another effect. Whenever a zombie you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is an Aristocrats piece. You could just run this alone, and I think that is a perfectly fine way to chip them down until you go to your Grey Merchant of Asphadel type thing. You could also be running Bastion of Remembrance, which is just generic Aristocrats. There's Diagraph Captain, which does that, but for zombies. So, I am running a couple of these. It's not the main focus. There's also Shepherd of Rot, which I really like. 1 gray, 1 black, tap. Each player loses 1 life for each zombie they control. That's another great way to chip people down, or for each zombie in play. So if your opponent's running zombies, that just helps you out even more. And in my deck, at least, you're not going to be terribly concerned about Shepherd of Rot hitting your own face, because you're going to be playing Grey Merchant Masville to get the life back. So maybe not as good against a life gain deck, but I don't think those are terribly prominent. So let's see. I've kind of been going on for a while here. Let's see. Right, so one of the things that I tried to put a focus on in my deck is using the decayed zombies if you're not going to be sacrificing them, because I think that you are going to be producing a great number of zombies, and Wilhelt can only, at least for his effects, sacrifice 1 per turn to draw a card. So I think the ability to do things with them other than attack or sacrifice is really important. So I pulled up one card that is just kind of a pet card of mine, kind of like a security blanket in a lot of ways, but I really like it. It's Opposition. So this is 2 and 2 blue. It actually doesn't give your creatures anything. So Opposition itself, the text reads, tap an untapped creature you control, tap an artifact, creature, or land.
Your stacks is showing.
Yeah, I run my favorite deck is Derevi Stacks. I really like Stacks. This card is awesome. You can take all of these decayed zombies. Doesn't matter if they have summoning sickness. This card does not care. You can use this to tap down their blockers, so you can swing through with your big old zombie. You can use this to tap down their artifacts so that they don't, the lithoform engine or whatever. And if you're really feeling devious, you've got a bunch of zombies, just tap down their lands. Now all of a sudden that guy that you knew was going to combo off, he doesn't have mana. Can't combo off. It's ridiculous. I think cards like this, effects like this, are really cool. I'm going to mention a few more that I found that I thought were pretty neat. If I can find them in my deck list. One that I think is really important for this deck is Springleaf Drum, which allows you to... Yeah, this card allows you... It's just 1 gray. You tap an untapped creature you control, and you add 1 mana of any color. Again, skip Summoning Sickness. It's basically a 1 mana mono rock, and in blue-black, you really need all of the ramp you can get. I think that this card is incredibly effective, and it only shows up in about 8,000 decks and doesn't even chart on Wilhelt's page. Any deck that creates a lot of tokens is going to want this unless it's in green. This card is awesome. You should be running Springleaf Drum if you're not already.
Number one takeaway from this podcast: Springleaf Drum.
Yeah, Springleaf Drum is
Legend.
absolutely incredible. I don't want to say it's on the Gravecrawler tier, but it's very close. It is very close. And it can tap Gravecrawler. Look at the synergy. Another one that I really like is Tradewind Rider. So you can tap 2 creatures you control and return a target permanent to its owner's hand. This one's not as powerful as the other two, but it does have it does have the effect of, you see a big alpha strike coming in, somebody just buffed their creature, whatever, you can do this at instant speed. They play a combat, God forbid they play a combat trick. You can absolutely just hose that right out. And then if they've got like a big Anthem effect that is going to make their go wide strategy much more effective, you can bounce that too. You can get rid of artifacts. You can even get you can even get lands with this, which I think is likely not what you're going to want to be doing, but there's a corner case that is very funny where you make them pay their shock land price twice, and whoa, it's a whole 4 damage. But I do kind of tend to like stuff like that. And then there's also the precon had a couple of these in it, I believe. These ones were specific for zombies. They were, where are you? Oh gosh. Gravespawn Sovereign showed up in the precon, and I think it's pretty good. It's got the high tap cost of tapping 5 zombies you control, but you can reanimate a creature. So if you're doing the Grey Merchant of Asphadel type thing, you've got a bunch of zombies. That's another way to get him back on the battlefield. Yeah, so I think in general, I'm sure there are other cards that I'm forgetting about right now that allow you to tap, untap. In fact, I know there are because I had to cut some of them from my deck. Crypt Breaker, for example. And then there's Larder Zombie and Siege Zombie, which just came out in Midnight Hunt. Those are kind of like second-rate payoffs towards the other ones, but they're cheap. And Larder Zombie in specific comes out on turn 1, and it's a zombie on top of that. So I think those cards are really good. A great way to make use of your Decayed Zombies if you're not just going to be sacrificing them, or if you can't sacrifice all of them. Let's see what else. And then I almost forgot Koskinen Falls. Koskinen Falls is a really interesting one. That is, so this is basically Propaganda or Ghostly Prison, but for black. And of course, you could be running Propaganda. So that's ultimately the reason I cut it from my deck, but I think it is worth a mention because you could double up on this. These effects aren't terribly powerful in EDH, but they are worth a mention. So Koskinen Falls, 2 gray, 2 black. At the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice it unless you tap an untapped creature, but then you get the Propaganda effect. So you're going to have a bunch of zombies around. They can't block anyway, and a single Decayed Zombie is going to be doing a lot more by taxing your opponents on attacks than it is by just sitting there. So I think another card worth mentioning.
Yeah. I love how much use you have for zombies in this deck, even when you can't attack with them. That's one of the weaknesses of my deck, is that if there's any cog that gets, or anything that gets in the middle of my cogs and I can't really do what I want to do, it really grinds to a halt and I have to really work to get it back going again. But it seems like you've got a lot of ways to keep your momentum going.
Yeah, I do think I did want to try and make the deck function without the Grey Merchant of Asphadel, because when your plan is so narrow that it's a single non-command zone card, Swords to Plowshares, no counter spells, my day is ruined. So I've kind of got to have another way to do it. Now I think there were only a couple other things I wanted to mention here. Another card I wanted to mention as far as ramp is concerned is Milliken. This is kind of a non sequitur, but let's pretend we were just talking about Stringleaf Drum for a second. Milliken is just 2 gray for an 0/1 that you can mill a card and add a gray mana. Now this, in most decks, is not great, but I think in Wilhelt it's really good because you're going to have ways to bring stuff back from your graveyard. You don't really care that the mana is colorless. It's another 2 mana mono rock. It's not, your Commander Sphere, which these days is a little bit slow. It's just there's no downside on this card other than the fact that maybe it can't attack, but it can still block. Maybe the downside is that it adds colorless, but I don't think you care about that nearly as much as you would think, because it's just another way for blue-black to ramp out and hit the big cards that they're going to want to drop.
Hey, and it's 25 cents instead of, a couple bucks like most mono rocks are.
Yeah, very cheap. And I think this is probably going to be a recurring theme on this podcast is we like cards that are cheap because that means you can buy them and play with
Yeah.
them. And you do not have to, like, at least at the moment, we don't make a lot of money. So having a budget deck that you can put together and still functions very well is very important to us. So ignore
For
the
sure.
$400 price tag on this deck that I've compiled. This is not a deck I'm going to buy in paper. I'm going to have a lot of fun with it on Untap.in, though.
Sponsor us on tap.
And so the fact that it's gray, I think, really doesn't matter at all, because this deck is going to want to be ramping as hard as it can, and I'm running like 10 artifact ramp pieces of artifact ramp.
Likewise.
Because your Army of the Damned and your what is it? Your Haunting Voyage, your Living Death, all of those expensive cards. What's Necrotic Hex is another great one. Each player sacrifices 6 creatures, you create 6 zombies. Beautiful edict effect. But they're all like 6, 7, 8 mana, which is normally not ideal, and you don't want to be running very many of those. But I think in this specific tribe, in this specific deck, it is okay to run a bunch of mono rocks and just try to boost your way up to those big drops. You can actually, have some fun, play some big spells, and that's originally what Commander was all about, even though the format is speeding up a significant amount.
There's a lot of very, very fun 5-6 plus cost spells that I had to cut from my deck. Unfortunately, I wish I could include them.
Yeah, do you want to mention some of them right now?
Oh, I'm not sure if I can remember that far. I should have kept them on in a maybe board on Architect, but they're long gone.
Rats. Yeah, I mean, I did end up cutting a large number of spells that I really wish I could have kept. Pontiff of Blight is a zombie that gives all of your zombies extort, and then all other creatures you have extort. The reason I cut it was because it's 6 cost, but it is still it's 4 2 black. You get a zombie. All of your other zombies have extort. You play your Grey Merchant of Asphadel. You've got 5 mana left over, and you don't have a way to recur it. Okay, so then you pay 5, and then Grey Merchant of Asphadel hits for 5 harder. All of your zombies having extort, I think, is a really powerful effect too, because you can just play your little Gravecrawler, dump the rest of your mana into it, and all of a sudden the opponent's getting pinged for 7, 8, 9, 10 damage. Do that for a couple turns in a row, and everybody's going to be hurting. Sir Conrad the Grim, another expensive graveyard payoff. Rite of Replication. You can kick that for 5. It becomes a 9-cost spell, but you create 5 copies of whatever you're kicking it at. You do that with Grey Merchant of Asphadel, and I think it's very unlikely that you lose that game. Endless Obedience is another one that I should have mentioned earlier, because you can convoke it using your zombies, tap the zombies to pay for it, and then you can bring creatures back. But the fail case there is the 6 mana revive spell, which is not very good.
Yeah.
And then Avatar of Woe is another big bomb that you might want to play even if you don't have stuff. It's 6 and 2 black for a creature with fear, so it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and black creatures. And it has the tap ability to destroy a creature. So that doesn't seem very good. But if there are 10 or more cards in your graveyard, it only costs 2 black. It's a 6/5, 2 black. It can't be blocked very easily, and you can tap it to destroy a creature. That's a really powerful effect, but the fail case scared me off a bit. Anyway, this deck really likes big mana, and if you can get there, go nuts. That's what zombies like to do, is spend a lot of mana to create a lot of zombies. So with all of that said, I think it's worth it to have a brief discussion on why are we not running the other zombie commanders? Like, why would somebody want to run Wilhelt? Do you have any thoughts on that matter?
Oh, I just see a lot of myself in Wilhelt. He's a young, strapping, very handsome, very horny man. So, I needed to build this deck to pay homage to him. I don't really have an answer to that. I don't think I have an answer to that. You could probably swap in some other Dimir commanders, and this deck would function as intended.
I do think an important part about Wilhelt, and I think probably what pushes him towards aristocrats more, is that you get the zombies back after
Yep.
you sacrifice them. Um, and for my deck, that's going to be awesome because you can sacrifice your stuff and you still have them available to use for opposition or whatever, twiddle them around and tap your opponent's stuff down. Um, but even so, also having the card draw built into Wilhelt, he's kind of just a one-man engine, and I think
Yeah.
like a lot of other cards, I don't know. I mean, like Narfi, Betrayer King, Ghoulcaller Gisa, they are solid. I mean, Grin too. Imagining him in the command zone. They're solid enough, but they don't quite have the complete package that Wilhelt does. Um, there's also Gisa and Gerolf. Another good zombie commander lets you mill yourself and then cast zombies from your graveyard, but I still think the value that you get from Wilhelt outpaces basically everything else other than the Scarab God and Farina, which, funnily enough, are the two second most played zombie commanders on EDH Rec, so I don't think that's a surprise. Varina giving you access to white, Scarab God giving you the fact that it's very easy to play, skips the command tax, yada yada yada. But Wilhelt as a complete package is just, I don't know. He's very, very hard to turn down, and I also do think the art is. It's fitting that the art is so nice for such a handsome character, lore-wise.
Yeah. I never thought that the draw part of his ability would really come into play, but the more I play this deck, the more I realize that I've got a full hand whenever I want it. I can if I'm playing at a good pace and I'm drawing one card for every card that I play, then I'm in a good spot. But if I'm really spewing out my hand, then I could start, taking care of some of these zombies and draw back, fill my hand up, and I'm there. And it's really second nature. It's really simple to do. I don't have to put a whole lot of thought into it. It's just a very simple card draw engine in one card, like you said.
Yeah. And if this just becomes absolutely ridiculous with your Midnight Reapers and Undead Augurs and stuff like that. You can be sacrificing them for other reasons. You can be sacrificing them through Wilhelt, but just losing a creature and drawing 2 cards per turn is already good. Drawing 4 cards per turn is incredible. You do the math. You sacrifice 2 creatures, you're drawing like a whole new hand. I almost think, and I honestly, now that we're talking about it, I regret not doing this to begin with. I think that there might be some kind of janky black-blue wheel deck in Wilhelt where you just try to draw as many cards as possible off. Maybe win with Thassa's Oracle, which is really boring. But I do think nobody's looking at Wilhelt and thinking, oh yeah, this guy's going to win with Thassa's Oracle. So in that sense, I think it could be kind of an interesting deck. Challenge to the listeners to build that one if you're feeling it. So I guess before we move on, do you have any more closing thoughts on my deck, your deck, Wilhelt in general, why Wilhelt's a zombie, etc.?
I do not.
All right. So then as we wrap this up, I wanted to take a sec and look into the future. So at the time we're recording this, we are in the middle of Midnight Vow or Crimson Vow spoiler season, and there have already been a number of cards that have been spoiled that I think are absolutely must-includes for almost must-includes. I don't want to say anything maybe other than Gravecrawlers a must-include, and Sean would take issue with that, so maybe there's nothing. But there are a couple cards. So Exploit is a mechanic that's coming back in Crimson Vow, and I don't think it takes a mathematician to figure out that Wilhelt is going to love Exploit cards. Sacrificing his zombies, not a huge downside because you're either going to be sacking a decayed zombie or a zombie that gives you another zombie, and then you get ETBs, you get death triggers, yada yada yada. Going back to the counterspells thing, there was one card in specific. Let me see if I can remember the name.
Overcharged Amalgam.
Overcharged Amalgam. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and read that one out?
I don't have it right now, but it's.
Oh, gotcha.
It's what? Flash flying, 3/3.
For 4, yeah.
And so 2 and 2 blue, right?
Yeah, I think it's either 2 and 2 blue or 3 and 1 blue, but either way, I don't think it's gonna be like. I think it's 3 and 1 blue. 2 and 2 blue might make it a little bit harder to cast, but Wilhelt's not gonna complain, I don't think. So you got your floor, which is a 3/3 flyer with flash, which that's not a great floor, I will admit. It's a flyer blocker, I guess. But when you exploit another zombie, or exploit any creature, you're going to be exploiting a zombie here, you get to counter target spell, which is absolutely awesome. So it's taking a counter spell and packaging it with a zombie.
Not just a target spell, it's also ability as well.
True.
a variety of cards that do one or the other, but this one will do both. It'll get you targeted abilities or other untargeted abilities as well from creatures.
Yeah, I mean, just a catch-all counterspell is always awesome, and then you staple it to a zombie body, and Wilhelt's pretty happy about that.
Yep.
And then there's like Mind Leech Ghoul, Fell Stinger. Fell Stinger lets you draw cards in case you weren't doing enough of that with Wilhelt the Rotcleaver. Mind Leech Ghoul lets you force people to exile cards from their hand. Rot-Tide Gargantua is another big drop. I don't even remember what it does when it exploits. Yeah, there's going to be more. We've mentioned a couple. There are going to be more. Keep your eye on that. The one card that I think is probably the craziest for Wilhelt is Geralt, Visionary Stitcher.
Geese's brother. We don't like
Geese's
him.
brother. So, yeah, that was a point of plot in the story was how much those two are sparring. So it is kind of funny to make them coexist in a deck, and also kind of funny in retrospect that they share a card. But Geralt Visionary Stitcher is just a slam dunk for Wilhelt here. So Geralt is 2 and 1 blue for a human wizard. Sucks to be human, but he gives your zombies flying. So that anthem effect usually comes on like 5/4 costs. Putting it on a 3 here, awesome. This card is cheap, and that's not the only thing it does. Then you pay 1 blue, sacrifice another non-token creature, and create an XX blue zombie creature token, where X is the sacrifice creature's toughness. So this card goes infinite immediately with Phyrexian Altar. So you sacrifice a decayed zombie or you sacrifice a zombie to Phyrexian Altar, generate a blue, sacrifice use the blue to sacrifice the decayed zombie, create a 2/2 blue zombie token, and then you just sacrifice it again. You put that out there with a Bastion of Remembrance, Plague Belcher. That's an instant win right there. Yes, it's 3 cards, but we're not playing CDH here. But just the ability to sacrifice your decayed zombies and turn them back into non-decayed zombies is huge. And I think there's certainly a lot of synergies that we're not thinking about right now. But I think Gerolf is really going to want to go into basically every Wilhelt deck that can fit him.
It's very ironic. I love it.
Yes, it is. I mean, who knows? I would like to see. I'm not sure we're going to get it because it seems like they're not really going this way. But I would love to see a follow-up to this story where we get a little bit more Wilhelt content. Maybe Wilhelt goes and teams up with Gerolf or something like that. But it's kind of a shame when we get these characters that are one-offs in the stories and then you never really follow up on it.
Yeah, especially when the story is so good. It leaves so many questions unanswered. Even in such a short time, it goes very in-depth into Wilhelt's past as well as Gisa and Gerolf's relationship. There's a lot of content there.
So, and I think that's probably something you can hope to expect from us in the future is lore analysis.
Yeah.
So, buckle up, listeners. So I think, Sean, unless you have anything else you want to say, that's going to do it for our first episode of Not Another Magic Podcast, NAMP for short. Go and NAMP your decks up, take a look at what we've got. Let us know if we're missing something. These decks are not going to be terribly competitive. We're probably shooting for a 5 or 6, maybe a 7 power level. But we would love to hear feedback if you guys have it. And just to see someone playing our decks that we made with our own 2 hands would be really something. So with that said, thank you for listening. Deuces.